Okay, hi. I think we can go ahead and get started. Yes, Joseph and I are here, and we're welcoming our esteemed six authors with books coming out in 2024. Esteemed authors, feel free to turn your cameras on. I'm Emma Copley Eisenberg. I am the previous director. Joseph is the current director. I'm just here helping and very excited to welcome these six amazing authors, six amazing books by or about Philadelphian. So we're really pleased to all be together. And Joseph will tell you a little more in case you don't know who we are. We are Blue Soup.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Emma, and thank everybody for coming, especially the authors to come and read a little bit from forthcoming work as well. I look forward to engaging all of that, and I hope that people ask a lot of great questions, especially kind of Philly-centered ones. So I am the current director of programs at Blue Stoop in Philadelphia. We are a literary nonprofit serving the Philadelphia region with the hopes to engage folks in writing practices, resources, and education outside of the university in particular, and to help folks engage a kind of longer term community in and around Philadelphia, especially. So do a whole host of events, some of which are kind of weekly free events called Thursdays on the Stoop every Thursday. We have classes that run 3 times a year in the fall, spring, and the summer for everything from beginning writers to more advanced folks. Some of the people that you'll hear today have also taught with Blue Stoop and will be involved in other programs that we have going on. And so we really appreciate any kind of organization and engagement. We have also a forthcoming reading called the Bricks reading series that happens every month with food and wine at Head in the Hand bookstore. And our next one is going to be on the 16th of January. So if anybody is interested, please feel free to come through there. And that's the 16th of January at 7 o'clock at Head in Hand Books. And again, really happy to have you all here.
Amazing. Thank you, Joseph. I will drop the link to the Bricks reading series too in the chat. So just a brief overview of how this is going to go. We have 6 authors here. Each one has written a book that speaks to something exciting, true about Philadelphia. We're going to hear from 3 folks introduced by me. Joseph's going to introduce the second 3. We're going to go in order of how their books are going to be birthed into the universe. So we're going to start with our earliest 2024 books. None of these books are out yet, we should clarify. So again, this is very special that everyone's getting a sneak peek into these not published books. So we'll hear from all 6 readers. Feel free to settle in, get a cup of tea, whatever beverage of choice. And then after that, there'll be a discussion. All 6 authors will be asking them some questions that Joseph and I have prepared. Please also feel free to start thinking about your own questions if you're here as an audience member. And that will be how it's going to go. And for each author, we will also drop the link to their book. Some folks here, I already know you've pre-ordered these books. Please also pre-order them now, even if they're coming out soon, or pick them up at one of your favorite bookstores in town. We're really pleased to have these authors with us, so let's please support them. Yeah, so without further ado, we're going to go into our first reader, Marie-Helene Bertino. So I will pin Marie in just a moment after introducing her beautiful book. So Marie's new book is Beautyland. It is her 4th book. It's going to be released on January 16, so soon. It's about an alien who's born to a single mother in Philadelphia who can communicate with her alien relatives via fax machine. Just received a rave in the New York Times. She's also the author of the novels Parakeet, 2 a.m. at the Cat's Pajamas, and the story collection Safe as Houses. Marie-Helene is local from Philadelphia, this here city. She has some amazing tidbits that I stole from her website, such as she once sang in a band named after a Jimmy Stewart movie. She's worked as a music writer, a biographer for folks living with TBI, and an end-of-life facilitator, as an editor for One Story, Catapult, and currently teaches in the creative writing program at Yale. So welcome, Marie. I'll go ahead and pin you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you for having me, Joseph and Emma. I am so delighted to be here in support of Blue Stoop, an organization that I care about very deeply. I'm going to read a short snippet from a book that is about to come out on Tuesday, Beautyland, that is set in Northeast Philadelphia, which is where I was born and raised. As is the main character of Beautyland, Adina. and I wanted to read a really Philly-centric part of the book. So I'm reading a little section that contains New Jersey, the shore, and underage dance clubs. Adina is in the back of Wildwood Outfitters reading a display of alcohol-related sweatshirts when the school of jacketed, ponytailed J girls approaches. You dance, right? Janae's ability to command respect is related to how high she's able to tease her bangs. She informs Adina that a local girl named Jessica had to drop out because her stepmother or her real mother or father's girlfriend sprained her ankle doing aerobics, so the whole family had to return to the city. Jen says this is a shame because Jessica could do an aerial, the worm, and the splits both ways. An aerial, the worm, and the splits both ways. No one has ever been as glamorous as Jessica inside Adina's imagination. Adina says, yeah, I dance. And Janae says, do you know the song The Choice Is Yours? If Adina says no, it will dispel the dream that is Jen, Janae, Joy, and Giselle arranged like stars among the circular racks of t-shirts that proclaim, heaven doesn't want me, hell's afraid I'll take over, waiting for her to answer. Listen to it tonight, Janae says, and be at my house tomorrow. Adina says, I'm already there, and immediately regrets it. Janae appears to be regretting it too, so Adina backwalks out of the aggressively lit store. She doesn't have to ask where Janae lives. She has memorized her awning, green with dark blue slats. Adina's admittance into grade school royalty will be due to the puny ankles of someone who might be Jessica's stepmother. The following afternoon, Jen, Janae, Joy, and Giselle show Adina the dance. Adina keeps her expression steady, points out where the formation is lopsided. Janae nods and sends Giselle to the back of the formation. The girls drink lemonade and Janae speaks professionally. They've agreed to allow Adina to dance with them for the Kaboom contest the following week. Winners get boardwalk passes that include all three piers and the Zorgons, the oversized plastic balls you can walk inside. Adina has watched them silently crossing the sand like exultations of wonder. Kaboom is an all-ages club in the basement of the diner. On weekends, it's only for adults, but on Monday evenings, they host a teen and preteen dance party. After the contest, Janae says, who knows? If Adina performs well, maybe their connection will continue when they return to where they actually live, near the sinking homes of Logan Triangle. What about Jessica? Adina says. I'll figure it out, Janae says. Adina will hear this phrase's firm, nonchalant rhythm for the rest of her life. I'll figure it out. The girls hit their first poses and Jen restarts The Choice Is Yours. When they reach the last formation, timed to the talking part, engine, number 9 on the New York Transit line. If my train goes off the track, what Janae calls the ruffle begins. A thrill courses through their bodies that explodes on pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. When Adina pumps her fists and figure eights, that's everyone's cue to leap into their final sequence. A heaving, pumping circle with Janae in front, beats around again until she's in front again, hitting her pose, hand on knee. Joy and Jen flanking her, then Giselle and the other Jen, then Adina. The final attitude. Adina thinks of the artist's rendering of the Big Bang in her biology textbook. She is made of stardust. Whatever scrap of lower township dance troupe tries to step will fail. Don't forget to wear a ponytail with a purple scrunchie, Janae says. If we win, I hold the passes. Then she corrects herself. When we win.
Incredible. Thank you. Pin myself again. Thank you so much, Marie. If we order your book, will you send us all a purple scrunchie? Can that be a thing? Okay, we'll figure that out in the campaign. Thank you so much for kicking us off. Okay, so also publishing January 16, doo-doo-doo, is friend of Blue Stoop, Annie Leontis. We're very, very excited. I have Annie's book here, Vanna White. So you too could have such a beautiful book. Annie Leontis, let me come pull up. Okay, this is Annie's second book. So Annie is making her like lateral shift in queer book land from a beautiful first novel called Let Me Explain You to their second book, Sex with a Brain Injury. So again, the book we're celebrating tonight, also coming out January 16. It is about what it means to be one of the walking wounded, those who have suffered traumatic brain injury. It's a memoir and essays. This explores Annie's journey facing fear, rage, physical suffering, the effects of head trauma on marriage, other relationships. It also incorporates research, scholarship, really profound thinking about the prison industrial complex. I'm very, very excited for everyone to get their hands on it. Again, Annie wrote the novel Let Me Explain You and is a professor at George Washington University, also taught for us here at Blue Stoop. So welcome, Annie.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Philly, for coming out tonight. I just want to share a fun fact. Marie and I have a book birthday. So I hope you will pick hers up. She is a genius and Philly's favorite witch. So just a little boost for Marie. I feel like I'm so excited for Beautyland. I'm excited for everybody's work on this panel. And I just, I can't help but think about this Bertolt Brecht quote in thinking about this gathering. He says, "Will there be singing in the dark times? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times." So this really feels like a really important, nourishing space. I wrote Sex with a Brain Injury across 3 apartments in South and West Philly until, I was kicked out when my landlord who said they wouldn't sell sold, and that happened like 3 times. It's a book really, I think, about building collectivity and community and mutual knowledge, which I think Blue Stoop is doing in really powerful ways as a writing culture and space, especially supporting scholarships and access to classes. So we really appreciate what you're able to do to support the organization. As Emma shared, I'm writing this as a memoir and essays after I had 3 concussions in a year, that became pretty intractable. But I'm really trying to write to create some visibility for the unseen suffering of people who are struggling with invisible disabilities. And so, some of the work that I'm doing here is thinking about the carceral system and how people in prison are 7 times more likely to have had a head injury before they got to prison, or that folks who are housing insecure, 1 in 2 of those individuals likely lost their home, likely had a head injury before they lost their home. So they're just like these invisible patterns that are really important to start recognizing. But I am going to just share briefly from the first essay called The Life Cycle of a Concussion. And thank you again for being here today. It starts with a big bang. It comes from the sky, a meteor, a falling object, a box. It comes out of nowhere, a car, a baseball, an opponent's fist, a partner's fist, an officer's baton, a player's helmet, the band Kani Basami throw during the girls' judo tournament, a skateboard crash, a roller coaster, the blast of an IED, a low-sitting shelf, a low-hanging branch, a rogue wave, a 2x4. Or you fall off your bike on a quiet road. You do not pass out. You aren't likely to. Less than 10% of concussions result in loss of consciousness. Later, you will wish you had passed out for just a minute or 2, as proof to you and everybody else that something happened. You'll secretly wish that there was blood, not too much blood, not like a whole brain bleed, just like a touch of Halloween-style makeup. Your brain, which is the texture of butter, ricochets around in its own liquids. It slams against the wall of the skull. The axons that connect the white matter of the brain, each a tiny filament less than 1/100th a human hair in diameter, fray and tear. The headaches and dizziness, these will come soon enough. Right now, you're freaked out because something is up with your eyes. You were told by the cartoons that you'd see stars, but actually the world is retreating, as if the air is taffy being pulled and stretched, the world in present tense, and you several seconds behind. Your friend answers the phone call you don't remember making, scrapes you off the pavement, stealing glances at you in the passenger seat because he's nervous you'll fall asleep or worse. You try to be the same person you were before you fell off your bike, crack a joke about how hard your head must be, only you're not sure if you actually spoke out loud or if you said the joke twice or if your friend was actually the one who made the joke. This is told you're called confusion. At the hospital, if you're lucky, you're put through a CAT scan. The CAT scan does not show a thing because technology cannot yet detect the microscopic axonal injury of concussion. The scans come back normal. The formal diagnosis is traumatically induced transient disturbance of brain function, but the people who treat you now and in the coming months interchangeably use the word concussion, mild head trauma, and traumatic brain injury. So that when you leave with the paper that says what you have and what you should do, which you cannot read, why can't you read? You were in the ACORN group in 2nd grade, which means you've been praised for your reading ability since age 7, and are pretty sure you've only gotten better since then. You are lost. You realize you have no idea what a concussion is, really. You return to work because the pamphlet says you should be good in 2 or 3 days. Here come the headaches, the sensation that your head is full of gauze, distortions in your periphery. You catch the start of people's sentences, but by the time they get to the question you're supposed to answer, or the thing you're supposed to remember the next time you see your colleague or boss, you forget what's been said. You still can't read. The words on the page refuse each other like oil and water. So you fake it. When you do finally get reading back, you can't recall what the paragraph is about when you get to the bottom. You can't draw a clock. The numbers get all bunched up, 7 to 12 crammed together like the condiments on a fridge shelf. And that is definitely not where the 6 goes. Even your little nephew knows the 6. You walk outside on your lunch break, and the sun brings new hurt. The whooshing cars, screaming birds, the trash truck, snippets of chatter, lawnmower, all a grind in your head. You have to cross the street because the guy in front of you is wearing a neon patterned shirt. Your mother calls. You can't listen to her for 2 minutes before nausea sets in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. That was wonderful, and that description of the brain as melted butter will never leave me, no matter how many times. So thank you so much. Yes, praise and appreciation. Thank you. So again, Marie and Annie's books are out January 16, so soon. Annie has a book launch at the Free Library January 18. Marie's launch in Philadelphia at the Novel Idea will be in February. I will drop the link to both of those as well. So our third reader, we're moving forward now a little bit into the months ahead. Our third reader is Asali Solomon, Quicksand. This is an incredible classic book that Asali has made new with a new edition, a new introduction, and that book is coming out January 30th. So Quicksand, if you're not familiar, is about Helga Crane, a multiracial woman who has long struggled to carve a path for herself amid the racial segregation of the early 20th century. As a teacher at an all-Black boarding school in the South, Helga quickly becomes unsettled by the way the school measures excellence based on proximity to whiteness. Asali's own writing, of course, is renowned throughout Philadelphia. She's the author of the novels Days of Aphrodite and Disgruntled, and the story collection Get Down, as well as professor and director of creative writing at Haverford. Such a wonderful friend, supporter of Blue Stoop, local friend to all. Thank you, Asali, and please welcome Asali Solomon. So
Thank you. Thank
yes,
you,
there
Emma.
we are.
Thank you for inviting me to do this. And I feel so left out because every single thing I write is about Philadelphia, but this is an introduction to Quicksand. So this launch happened actually in 1928, but this is a new edition and they asked me to write the introduction. So and I think Emma gave you a little bit of introduction to the book Quicksand in case you're unfamiliar with it. You should definitely read it. I'll read a little bit from the introduction. Nella Larsen's Quicksand, nearing 100 years old at the time of this writing, is very well known in some reading communities, including enthusiasts of Black women's fiction and scholars of the Harlem Renaissance, but remains obscure in others, It is possibly true that Larson's second and final published novel, Passing, is better known. There has even been a recent film adaptation. I would argue that Quicksand, with its vibrant settings and fascinating protagonists, is equally cinematic. Helga Crane, a beautiful young mixed-race woman with a turbulent past, moves around the United States and abroad in search of something she never finds. Though Helga is insightful and sensitive, her decisions often seem capricious. As soon as she finds belonging and regard in one setting, she leaves. I suspect that the novel's lack of fame is intimately connected to what makes it compelling and urgent. The as yet unanswered question, what's up with Helga Crane? So what's up with Helga Crane? Family trauma may provide a partial answer to the question. Helga is both cruelly and passively rejected by her white kin, the only family she's ever known. For my money, one of the great antagonists in early 20th century literature, akin to Victorian era villain, is Uncle Peter's wife. When Helga comes to call on her uncle in Chicago, Mrs. Nilsson turns her away, making the outrageous claim that because her parents never married, Helga is somehow not a blood relative of the white mother who birthed her. In spite of this emotional neglect, Helga is a woman of education and excellent personal style who is considered conventionally beautiful, partly because she is mixed race. While her blood relatives do not embrace her, Helga finds men and women who welcome, admire, and even offer to worship her almost everywhere she goes. But it's not enough. Though its source is unclear, the unsettledness of Helga pulls me in as a reader again and again. It has been almost 3 decades since I first read the novel, and yet at various turns I still find myself screaming, Helga, no! Helga, why? Given that she has neither family support nor a trust fund, I'm shocked anew each time she torches a bridge to employment at Naxos, to the sympathetic and appealing Robert Anderson, to her Copenhagen family. One element of Quicksand that offers a clue to the riddle of Helga Crane is the novel's prose. Larson's language, no matter what it describes, is a spiritual celebration. Our story begins with and overflows with descriptions so exquisite they border on decadence. While the novel's most sumptuous images often contain elegant objects and beautifully appointed rooms or the natural world, a shivering apricot frock, fresh-smelling sheets of cool linen, Helga also appreciates the physical beauty of blackness, in a way rare for characters of her era. Why, she wondered, didn't someone write a plea for color? She thinks, deeply offended when a dark-skinned girl's flaming orange dress is confiscated and destroyed by the school matron at Naxos. As poetic as it might be for the reader, Quicksand suggests that perhaps Helga's love of beauty, as well as her perceptive, capacious, and quirky imagination, are what keep her dissatisfied. It might also be the case, however, that her mercurial displeasure and frequent desire to escape is more universal than we are conventionally led to believe. Who among us, even those with houses and careers, our basic needs met, feels fully at home or completely satisfied occupying their prescribed station? Who has not felt like an unworthy imposter, but also somehow completely above it all, moving between different social and institutional milieu, trying to stay ahead of a feeling? So much of 20th century literature about middle-class men, primarily white, is devoted to the crisis of feeling hemmed up by a perfectly good life. And yet, who is more hemmed up than women, than Black women? Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Asali. And this introduction it's a special edition. So this is the only edition that will feature Asali's introduction coming out January 30th, right? Okay, amazing. I'm gonna pass it over to Joseph to introduce our next readers.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Asali, for that intro. There's so many other questions to ask about Helga as well, especially the kind of difference in popularity between Passing and Quicksand too, but hopefully some of those will come up in the Q&A as well. But that was actually great. So I'm looking forward to reading the whole thing as well in the kind of new edition. I want to remind folks, participants, you can start putting questions now if you want in the Q&A tab too, so that Emma and I will be looking at those once we move officially into the Q&A portion. So I'll introduce Robert. So Robert Sullivan's newest work of criticism is Double Exposure, which comes out April 23rd, 2024. Personal explanation of the American West and the work of one of America's greatest photographers. The book documents the author's own road trip across the West in search of the places, many long forgotten or paved over, that O'Sullivan pictured. Robert, a 2022 Guggenheim Fellow, is also the author of Rats, The Meadowlands, A Whale Hunt, and My American Revolution, and his writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Public Space, and Vogue, and he lives in Philadelphia. Thank you, Robert, for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me? You can, great. And it's really nice to be here. Blue Stoop, the phrase "I am not worthy" is in my head mostly. It's like flagging up inside my head, like emoji or something. Unfortunately, I have to show a picture. I've never written a book with pictures in it before, but I have 73, I think, pictures in this book. And this is the one I want to show you. And you see a kind of fissure, a kind of crack in the earth, and you might see sort of a mist in the middle. And if you stare at it for a long while, you might see a person in that mist, but then again, you might not. But there is apparently a person in that mist. So that photograph's by this guy, Timothy O'Sullivan. And yes, I wrote a book about Timothy O'Sullivan. It's sort of not about Timothy O'Sullivan, but it sort of is. And each chapter kind of looks at a photograph. And so here's this one photograph. I'll read the very beginning of the book, and hopefully that'll be about 3, 4, 5 minutes. And then I'll read one line of poetry. So that's sort of at the beginning of the book. This is an image, if you'll remember that image, please, sorry. This is an image of a fumarole, an opening in the crust of the earth that emits steam and volcanic gas. And it was made in 1867, what was then the 3-year-old state of Nevada, where the photographer set up his camera in a small dry basin that is still today an area of significant geothermal activity. It is an in-between place, or feels like it. The Sierra Nevada mountains rise a few miles to the east, and the hills of the Virginia Range are to the west and even closer. At the very moment of this photographic plate was exposed, the Virginia Range was being hollowed out for copper. Regiments of men were digging through cave-ins and explosions, mining bigger and bigger cavities in the earth. None of this activity is captured by fissure vent, as the image is titled. Nor is the molten rock that lies 1,000 feet down, propelling steam up through crystalline cracks in the earth so fast as to cause the ground itself to rumble, an engine-like sound that in the 1860s earned the fumarole a nickname, Steamboat Springs. Also not pictured is the nearby resort, built to exploit the adjacent hot springs. The springs were well known to the Northern Paiute and Washoe people who, after pointing them out to the settlers, were now being monitored by white militias and the U.S. soldiers at nearby forts. If this picture seems to have less to say about resorts and leisure and more about violence, if it resembles a rift or a scar or even a wound, note that the man who made it had recently arrived in Nevada as an employee of the U.S. Army. Note, too, that from 1861 through 1865, he served as a photographer alongside the Union Army, following the troops as they fought against the Confederate soldiers in the eastern United States. For the Army, he photographed maps and views of potential battle sites. And for publishers, he photographed soldiers and battlefields and dead bodies. His pictures alternately depict the mundane and the horrifying, and together they make up what are today the most widely known images of the war. The photographer's name was Timothy O'Sullivan. To make this image of the fumarole, O'Sullivan used a camera that looked less like what we think of today as a picture-making device, a camera or a smartphone, and more like a large, light-proof wooden box, the size of an old TV set or a mini fridge. The front punctuated by a heavy brass lens, the polished glass protruding like a cross between a nose and an eye. Inside the box, in the darkness of its light-proof interior, a rectangular plate of glass weighted like an empty movie screen for the light that would be focused through the lens. In this instance, light reflecting off a jagged valley floor in the winter of 1867. If you've ever looked up at the beam of light from a movie projector or noticed a sunrise flashing on a bedroom wall, you know that light is alive, or appears to be. In order to capture the light of that very day and then to hold on to it, to construct, in other words, an image using that 1867 Nevada winter light, O'Sullivan covered his photographic plates with collodion, a nearly clear syrupy liquid that was then further treated with a solution of light-sensitive silver nitrate. The method was, and still is, referred to as the wet plate collodion process. Collodion was employed in various other capacities around the time of the Civil War. It was used as a liquid bandage. When smeared on broken skin and allowed to dry, it patched up cuts and lacerations. The essential ingredient in collodion is nitrocellulose, also known as gun cotton, which was made by treating cotton with sulfuric and nitric acid. Gun cotton was an explosive used to power some of the artillery shells that cratered the very battlefields O'Sullivan photographed. My point being that the same materials that offer us a view of this fumarole and the aftermath of what is referred to today as the Civil War were key ingredients in that very war. The cotton picked by enslaved people on Southern plantations, and the silver extracted from mines blasted out of indigenous lands. When O'Sullivan removed the lens cover, the ingredients were, by a timed out entrance of light, exposed. And then the little one line from a memoir by the poet Lois Simpson, from a book called North of Jamaica, he wrote in 1972. The line from the poet is this: "To remember a battle in which he has taken part, a man must make himself innocent again, innocent of newspapers, books, and movies. He must remember his actual life, the life of the body. Everything else is journalism." That's mine. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Robert. That's great. The next reader we have is Michael Diegler. So Michael Diegler's debut novel, Early Sobrieties, will be published on May 7th, 2024, moving a little bit further ahead in time. The novel follows Dennis Monk, who was kicked out of his working class parents' home in the Philly suburbs mere months into his fragile sobriety. The 26-year-old spends his first dry summer couch surfing through South Philadelphia. I'll remember the days of couch surfing before COVID, struggling to find a place for himself in the throng of adulthood. Michael's fiction has appeared or is forthcoming in Harper's, McSweeney's, Quarterly Concern, Electric Literature, Recommended Reading, and elsewhere. He's also taught at Blue Stoops Foundation's fiction class. So thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Emma. Great to be here. This is, my book comes out in May. It's my first book. This is my first reading as a guy with a book. So I'm like very excited to be doing a really Philadelphia specific reading. I live in LA now, so I feel very like remote from Philadelphia a lot of the time. But it's great. I love Blue Stoop. It's great to be here with like some of the true great Philadelphia writers. It's a very Philly book. I don't know if you can see the skyline is on the cover. I wrote it when I was living there. It's all set in South Philadelphia. I'm very excited. I'm going to read a little bit from later in the book. The chapters are very episodic. They kind of work as short stories. This one's called Passyunk. I'll be using the non-South Philadelphia pronunciation of Passyunk. The main character of the book, he's this guy who he got sober. He's about 10 or 11 months sober at this point. News of my sobriety had spread throughout the land, at least among a certain subset of individuals for whom sobriety was a rare and ill-considered state. It was Oktoberfest at the Brauhaus, which, in the name of public merriment, had shut down a block of South Street in order to validate a lot of debased and antisocial behavior. Not that such conduct didn't occur nightly on South Street, but the Brauhaus had welcomed it into the reputable light of day, to the accompaniment of Schlager and Volksmusik, no less, which surely represented, if not an act of outright delinquency, at least some form of civic negligence. I had come for a soft pretzel and to reaffirm my own constructive life choices. Philadelphia was a small town when you got down to it, particularly if you sifted out those people for whom the Brauhaus Oktoberfest held little appeal. I ran into a number of acquaintances. Katie Doran was working the pretzel stand, and I imagined she mentioned my presence to Lila Noth in the beer tent, who likely tipped off Rob Gill and his troupe of inebriates, who accosted me outside the vegan cafe from which I was contemplating the purchase of a bubble tea. Gill had Sean Culp with him and Sean Porth, and between the two of them, they carried Mildew Hanafi like the crucified Christ, buttressing his slack, skinny arms with their shoulders. They cast the drunk man at me, repeating my name as though they believed it held incantatory properties. Dennis Monk, Dennis Monk, Dennis Monk. What? I said. The lax face of Hanafi was pressed against my shirt. His flaccid limbs draped themselves around my neck. He's overserved, cried Gill. Gill, too, was overserved. The whole group of them was overserved. They continued to overserve themselves from the plastic beer steins germinating from their hands. You're sober, Dennis Monk. You need to take him home. Is that Dennis Monk? Muttered Hanafi. I know Dennis Monk. I don't know where he lives, I said, turning my face away from the semi-conscious reveler nuzzling at my sternum. He smelled strongly of beer and slightly of vomit. I knew very little about Hanafi. He was 22, on the shorter edge of average height, with elfin features that suggested intoxication even when he was sober, which he rarely was. I'd only ever encountered him in low-lit bars, where the regulars evolved a sort of cave blindness toward one another. I was alarmed to see him in daylight. He lives way down Passyunk, Gill. He lives way down Passyunk. Gill had sardine eyes terrified of ever missing a thing that happened in the world. Down past 19th. I'm not going to take him there, I said. I don't even have a car. Just put him on a bench for a while. He'll get sunstroke and die, wailed Gill. He'll putrefy like a jack-o'-lantern. Jesus, just put him in the shade, I said, though already the old guilt was revving in my chest. I wanted nothing to do with the chemically impaired. They annoyed the fuck out of me, in a way that only those exhibiting my own inadequacies could. But for that same reason, I felt an obligation toward them. They brought to mind all the people who had aided me when I had been in similar states of degeneration. All the people, too, who hadn't bothered. Part of what impelled a person to substance abuse in the first place was the hope that, if he forfeited his faculties and lay himself before the mercy of his fellow man, some reluctant Samaritan might come along and look after him for a little while. I had once wobbled so discomfitingly before a bar in Callow Hill that a woman invited me into her car and dropped me off at a friend's place in Fairmount, asking nothing of me other than a promise that I would go straight to bed and take better care of myself in the future. Another time, a group of college students 5 years my junior, not one of whom I'd met before or since, bought me a late-night donut in Old City before sticking me in a cab bound for an address I knew in Northern Liberties. One time I stayed on the Blue Line long past my stop, all the way to Upper Darby, just to prove to a girlfriend that I was as proud as I was angry, as I was drunk, as I was baffled by my life, only to get mugged outside the 69th Street station and stumble back to her doorstep, 35 shameful blocks on foot, without receiving a single look of human recognition from a single person who crossed my path. For all of that, the people who'd helped me and the ones who hadn't, I agreed to get Mildew Hanafi to his bed, even though I didn't want to. He'd become me there in my arms, and I was someone else. Hooray, cheered the inebriates, Gill and Culp and Porth and all of them, like I had solved something permanent in their lives. Hooray for Dennis Monk. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. That's great. Our third and last but not least reader is Elise Juska. Elise Juska's third novel is Reunion, which will be published on May 7th, 2024. There's an enthralling story about three friends in their 40s forced to reckon with their lives during a college reunion in coastal Maine. Beautifully observed and insightful, Reunion is a page-turning novel about the highs and lows of friendship from a writer at the head of her powers. Ellie is also the author of the novels If We Had Known the Blessings and is a professor of creative writing at UArts. She also lives in Philadelphia. Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Blue Stoop. It's been so nice listening to all of these sneak previews. I actually got to read an early copy of Annie's memoir, which was so amazing, and I'm excited to get my hands on everybody else's books. So Reunion, I started writing this book in May 2020. I was supposed to have a college reunion that was canceled. And so I started writing about three friends who go back to a college reunion once the pandemic has subsided, which was weird because I didn't know, when or if that was going to happen or what that would look like. And I started it, not thinking it was going to turn into a book. It was more an act of projecting or longing or anxiety diffusing. But I kept going with it. And I was thinking a lot about the way that the college reunion is like a coming back to a place that is no longer really there or is changed deeply, and coming back to the world after the pandemic is sort of coming back to a place that isn't really there or is changed deeply. So I was thinking a lot about these things while working on the book. It takes place over the weekend of the reunion. It follows the three friends. And I'm just going to read just 2 pages from the introduction to Polly, who is, she lives in Brooklyn. She's a single mother. She's a dedicated and underpaid adjunct instructor. She was not going to go to the reunion for reasons that become clearer as the book goes on, but her teenage son decided that he wants to go to see a friend who lives on an island near the college. His name's Jonah, and he just finished his senior year of high school online and is struggling with his mental health. So she decided she wants to go in order to spend this time with him. So here they are. They're leaving a rest stop in Massachusetts. He's just been in the bathroom, probably definitely getting high. And they're back in the car and they're talking about the reunion. Then we're off, Polly said, starting the engine. She put on her cheap sunglasses, the ones Jonah had once said made her look like a hungover B-list celebrity. How much longer, Jonah said. Not too long. In actual hours, Polly. 2, she said, but we're almost in Maine, which was a slight exaggeration. In a few miles, they'd be in coastal New Hampshire, and from there it was only a handful of exits. But Maine was deceptively enormous, all those woods. So what do you actually do there? Jonah asked. The question caught Polly off guard, but this was what her son was like lately, distant except in the moments when he suddenly felt like talking. On the island? Not much. I think that's the whole point. I meant the reunion, he said. Do people trade business cards, compare net worth? God, let's hope not, Polly laughed, although she feared he wasn't too far off base. It was one of the most unappealing aspects of a college reunion, the compulsion to measure one's success against everybody else's. It didn't help that many of Polly's classmates were by conventional standards successful. Tech investors and CEOs and hedge fund managers, and some were doing genuinely amazing things. A director at the Smithsonian, 3 Fulbright scholars. Among Walthrop alums, Polly's career was singularly unimpressive, and since her last appearance, not much had changed. Still adjunct faculty, still criminally underpaid. That fall, when enrollment took a hit, she'd lost half her classes and filed for unemployment. She'd spent her stimulus checks on groceries and heat. You just hang out, I think, she told Jonah. Awkwardly socialize, drink, eat. Sounds depressing, he said. Polly was tempted to remind him that he was the reason she was going, but didn't want to put him on the defensive. Well, she said, don't underestimate the eating. The food's good. They're kind of famous for it. He frowned. This is college food? I know, it's an oxymoron, but it was an expensive school. I guess we got what we paid for. Jonah started poking through the snacks in the center console. So the people who go there are all rich. Not all, she said. I mean, some are. She didn't want to stray too far in this direction. Jonah could get quickly heated about the 1%, and she didn't want to lose him. The truth was that Polly had often felt like an outlier at Walthrop, raised by a single mother in a small 5th floor walk-up. Last spring, when her students objected to having their cameras on for Zoom classes, some faculty called it an excuse to slack off, but Polly defended the students. It was a matter of privacy, of equity. Had she been forced onto a screen during college, there would have been no concealing the water-stained ceilings, the grimy windows, the mother who in any state of sobriety might wander into the frame. Jonah tore open the barbecue chips, the bag exhaling a puff of salty air. You never talk about it, he said. What, college food? College, he said, in general. Well, it was a million years ago, Polly said, deflecting. She held the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles straining against her skin. She had a horrifying vision of being trapped in a weekend-long loop of conversation about investment portfolios and kitchen renovations. She thought again about her colleague, Janelle, a 29-year-old PhD in Comp Lit who supplemented her teaching income by delivering for DoorDash. When Polly had private messaged her during a Zoom meeting to say she was going to her reunion, Janelle replied, "Went to my 5, and it made me question all my life choices. Demoralizing. Do not recommend." Regardless, Polly said to Jonah, "This one will be different, right?" Thanks.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you.
Yay. Sorry. Thank you. I'm doing all the pins. So thank you so much. If we can get another round of chat love and appreciation for all of our 6 readers, that's super welcome. And the weird thing about running a literary organization is that you're also a huge nerd, and Joseph and I are writers in our own right. So we're going to take this wee selfish moment to plug. I'm going to get to plug Joseph's book, which I don't have the hard copy yet of Joseph's new book, God Bless You, Otis Spunkmeyer. I do have Joseph's previous book, Sink, memoir. But I was like, hey, like we exchanged and I get to read a little bit. And I do have to say, like, very truly, Joseph, like as I started reading the book, you really do fall in. It's a book that really captures the reader from the first page. It's super immersive. It's about a man, Black man in Philadelphia, single dad, who's holding a lot of contradictions. He's an Army vet. He has a history in the medical field. He's a academic. He's thinking about what it means to be a Black man, a father, a Philadelphian, an intellectual, all at the same time. So Joseph's new book, God Bless You, Otis Spunkmeyer, comes out on June 18, correct?
I think so. That sounds
Yeah.
right.
So I'll drop I'll drop the link to that as well. So thank you.
Yeah, and I should say a couple words. And Emma, I don't even know if you know this or that I told you. So I had read Emma's first book before we had met. Ostensibly kind of a true crime book, but also not a true crime book that I thought was kind of really innovative and rigorous in the sense of what a nonfiction book could do, and was taking a great deal of risks with intimacy especially. And so I was really excited to hear that Housemates was coming out, which I don't have kind of hard copy of, but I had kind of fallen in love with The Third Rainbow Girl before meeting Emma, so I was really excited about this next one. And so Housemates is a book about, in a lot of ways, about intimacy and about these two queer women living in the same house in West Philly who decide to go on a road trip. In some senses, following a relationship between art, in particular photography, and thinking about their own lives together and what the kind of capacities of art making and living in the ways that one might want could be. So I'm also very excited about this book that comes out May 28th, if I'm correct. Okay, I did it right, on May 28th. So please think about picking that up as well.
You got it. Thank you so much. So I also got several messages before this reading saying Blue Stoop owes us a party. So apparently we owe you all a party for all of these books. So stay tuned. And I'm going to bring on all of our amazing authors for a conversation. So if there are burning questions from audience members, like Joseph said, please drop them in the special Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Joseph and I will kick it off with some questions. Again, all of our authors are welcome. Please chime in, and also whatever order works for you. So I'll just kind of open things up and say, you know, you're all many things. You're no one thing. We sort of clumsily grouped you by folks that are saying and thinking of interesting things about Philadelphia at this moment. And I just kind of wanted to open it up by asking, like, what does it feel like to you to be writing either from within or from without, but having ties to Philadelphia? What does it mean to you to be in this room of Philadelphia folk? Does that show up in your writing in any way?
Okay,
I
no
can
one is
start.
going to speak.
So yeah, I like so my sort of relationship to Philadelphia is I grew up kind of in Bucks County on sort of the edge of the suburbs. which always felt like very remote and boring. And I still kind of have trouble writing about it in a way that feels interesting. But I just always wanted to be in Philadelphia because it just seemed like such, like where all the action was, and I feel like so much of my initial writing was all like very, very Philadelphia based, and it was kind of like I felt like I was kind of writing myself into the city a little bit, like in trying to tell stories of the city and about like people like me, people like the people that I knew. I was kind of like creating a space for myself within it that was like sort of, and then there's like this weird magic where like when you write about a place, you kind of like you become part of the fabric of that place. You make art about a place. And an interesting thing now that I've been doing that for 10 or 15 years is so much of the stuff that I was writing about has changed or gone away. Like this, like I've been around long enough that the city has started to change, and then you kind of become like this weird like you're documenting kind of your era of the city. And especially now that I don't live there anymore, like the my years there feel like very set in stone, and like that's kind of the Philadelphia that I'm writing about, is the Philadelphia that like kind of exists still, but is starting to exist less, and so that's been I don't know, an interesting that the relationship continues to evolve, I guess.
I can jump in. So I grew up not in Northeast Philly, but right next to Northeast Philly, and my entire extended family lived in Northeast Philly. And that is the place I go back to in my writing constantly, much as maybe in my actual life, I tried to move away from there unsuccessfully. That's the place I just return on the page. Every story I've ever written about a kid it's always set in Northeast Philly. It's just such a deep like sense memory. And I mean, I think one of the things when I think about that world, I mean, I grew up in this world where, 27 people came to see you go to your prom, 27 family members, or like the neighbor's like lawn had on it like a giant statue of a saint next to like a huge inflatable Eagles football player. I mean, the detail like can't be beat, but it felt like it was like worlds within worlds within worlds. Like the world might be like 8 blocks by 8 blocks, or like 2 blocks by 2 blocks. Like the detail was just so, like as a writing landscape, just so idiosyncratic and like specific and prideful and local. In my book, The Blessings, it was about a big family in Northeast Philadelphia, and I somehow like made a reference to a character driving back to Philadelphia from the Jersey Shore, and I named the wrong like bridge, which is maybe one of the 10 most egregious errors you could make in my family about Philadelphia. So they like changed it for the paperback because I had that detail wrong. But anyway, yeah, I think just Philadelphia is it's like wonderfully rich, so many different like versions of it, and also rich.
I guess I mean, the bridge, that's pretty great. But you had me at Massachusetts rest stops. So like, I'm so excited to be, but thinking about everyone in different landscapes. And I guess, this book took away way too long, more than a decade. I used to write books kind of more frequently, but this one was really hard. I think because I was trying to sort of look at the relationship between like violence and trauma, and there's actually a lot of neurology in this, like, because all soldiers go to war and they come back. Most of them come back with you hear it pronounced tinnitus or tinnitus, which is a kind of hallucination. Like something happens when you hear loud noises and your brain changes, and so this is a lot about thinking about like bodies in the land, and And so two big things in Philadelphia, especially, during COVID, to try to finish this book up during COVID, again, about a Civil War photographer who went west to photograph after photographing the Civil War. But, my kind of feeling is, after all of this work, is that, the Civil War, as one amazing writer from Pennsylvania talked about, like in 2006 or so, the Civil War wasn't civil. The South, in a way, won and shook hands with the North, and they proceeded into the landscape. So the sort of after the Civil War, the war begins again anew, or continues into the West, and all of this violence in the land. So, to think to, like, during COVID, to see, like, in the neighborhood we live in Philadelphia, Fifth near Girard, Cecil B. Moore, like, all the buildings were being torn down, like, during COVID, and things ripped out and put together. And when you think about sort of the violence of corporations and tribes in the West, I know this is getting out of control. This is why I should just read 2 pages at the beginning and stop talking. But when you think about all that violence as a kind of natural mechanism of the kind of US government, and then you watch it happen, in cities, and Philadelphia's a kind of an outstanding example of the way, the way things work to sort by race and class, and how money and corporations and So, but the other thing is the kind of body in the land and photography. So photography as this kind of, especially older photography, not digital, but film, has this kind of liquid intelligence, which is actually a phrase that I got from an essay by an amazing University of Pennsylvania photographic thinker about photography. But the idea of liquid intelligence, that the world, if we think about things in a kind of more liquid way, and just photography in general, New York's often thought of as some kind of art capital, but of course it's not. It's a capital of the markets. And Philadelphia has this long history, as I'm sure everybody knows, of being this arts capital. All this amazing stuff has happened, photography in particular. And my guy, Timothy O'Sullivan, who you would know his Civil War photographs, but you would never write a book about him because you can't know anything about him. Don't do it. I made a mistake. I'm dealing with that now. But he was mistaken for a guy named Thomas Moran, another photographer. The very 2 or 3 photos we have of O'Sullivan, it's now down to like 1 or 2, because for a long time we thought this was him, but no, it was Thomas Moran, who was from Philadelphia, who sort of in the kind of very late 1800s, sort of kind of was one of the big people who moved photography into, had people start to think about photography as art, not as a kind of documentary thing or a machine that took in stuff. So Philadelphia is, just every day when you see them knock things down, and it feels like war. But on a somewhat positive note, the kind of deep history of landscape painting and photography. So I tried to be mute the whole time, but there I go. I talk too much. Okay, I'm muting.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Joseph.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead, Annie.
I really appreciate everyone's answers about the kind of artifacts and details, especially, growing up or doing the kind of investigative work that Albert is doing. I grew up just outside of Philly and, spent like my youth years on South Street. And it's a place that feels, if it has always felt like home and been home. But I can't not think about like the ethos of Philly, like just like the kind of our reputation as being like gritty. And I feel like, yeah, like write a book like Sex with a Brain Injury, makes sense that it comes out of Philadelphia somehow, right? Like we just don't back down. It doesn't matter if we're losing on the field or like we just don't back down. And I really love that spirit of the city. It feels like very close to me. And I'm working on a novel now that's looking at like the way mythologies of place, particularly, it's set in Philly. And so thinking about how mythologies are handed down within a family or a city or a nation. And of course, Philadelphia as like the birthplace of America. And to Robert's point about like disappearing you know, cities replacing cities, you know, Philadelphia replacing Philadelphia is something that I've been chasing down a little bit. But yeah, appreciate that question.
Yeah, just checking if anybody wanted to come into that question. I have another one that's kind of related to some of the things that folks have been talking about. And it's especially true with what you had read, Marie, when you were talking about these kinds of social spaces that younger people would go to on some days versus others. I really think a lot about how some of the landscape in Philly has changed. For example, like that, you know, and if we're talking like Northeast, quite literally the WOW skating rink that was next to Kmart across the street from Roosevelt Mall, which used to be the kind of place that like young people would go and gather, et cetera. There's not a lot of those kind of, I mean, the Palace is mostly closed. There's like one replacement. A lot of things are like no longer there. So I wonder how folks are thinking about physical kind of material space, especially social space, like where people can go and actually do things that don't cost money, especially that young people can go and do in the city, and how that comes up in the writing and thinking about Philly as a city.
Thank you, Joseph. I was going to ask you if you knew those spaces in Northeast Philly, and it seems like you do. Beautyland is actually named for a space that used to be in Northeast Philadelphia, a cosmetic store that all the neighborhood moms would go to for their curlers and things, that was open for 50 years and then closed last year, actually. I just found that out. And there's a roller skating rink in the book called United Skates of America that is based on one on the boulevard that was called United Skates of America. And I just loved that pun so much. But the underage clubs, I thought everyone grew up going to dance clubs when they were 11 years old, until I dated someone and mentioned to them, oh, you know, when I was 11 and I would put my little Z Cavaricci hot pants on and I would go with my friends and do choreographed dances at the corner dance club. And the reaction was, what are you talking about? Nobody had neighborhood dance clubs. And I realized, oh, there's more to Northeast Philadelphia than I realized. Like, it's less common than I knew to be dancing that age. But one of the reputations that Philadelphia at least used to have, I don't know if it still does, is that everyone there can dance. And so I grew up with, you know, doing all the dances with my friends, and, you know, we still love to dance, and dancing is a big part of Beautyland. And I think those spaces for us were places to go to dance to hip hop or to roller skate to music and Whitney Houston. And those are some of my fondest memories.
This is interesting because I write about Philadelphia and everything that I write. And my first two books, there were a lot of dance parties in them. I've never actually thought about this as like a Philadelphia thing. I thought of it more as an obsession of mine, partially because a lot of those scenes were like traumatic suburban school 7th grade dances. But today I was thinking about how my most recent novel I wrote, The Days of Aphrodite, also technically ends with an ad hoc dance party. But now that I'm hearing about this, I'm sort of interested to think about if Philadelphia is like a particular place where people are more interested in dancing than not. And to the question about young people and spaces, like, one of the short stories I wrote in my first collection was about this like absolutely mythic dance party I went to in somebody's basement. And it was just like, we had the best time. And then at the very end, these guys went behind the couch and took out a bunch of automatic weapons. And like, that wasn't actually an interesting part of the story. It was just like, just kind of a thing that happened. But I don't know, I still feel really nostalgic about some of the some of the extremely fun dancing times that, you know, maybe could have gone off the rails and didn't. The other thing I want to say is so interesting about this gathering is, like, I have to tell you all, so, you know, I'm born in 1973. Philadelphia being what it is, I haven't really had this much community with people from the Northeast in my life until now. It's almost like other countries or something like that. I mean, I went to Central High School, and I remember they had that Thanksgiving Day game, that long-term rivalry with Northeast. But yeah, it was kind of like a completely different planet in so many different ways.
That's funny you say that. That's how I was gonna say someone at a reading once told me about Northeast Philly. I didn't know people lived there. And this was a person from South Philly at one of the, I think it was like at one of the Moonstone readings or whatever. I was like, oh, okay, great. Thanks, thanks for that, y'all. And if anybody else wants to chime in on that question as well, there was a question in the chat for you, Bob, but I think you kind of answered it. It was about the interest in O'Sullivan as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, we're speaking to so many readers. I want to also make room for writers who might be in the audience. I was gonna maybe ask, like, we have such a wide range of folks in different spots in your literary trajectories, from, you know, Mike being your debut novel to folks like Asali and Marie and Bob, you know, fourth, fifth, and Ellie books, and then Joseph and I and Annie in sort of mid-career moments. And I wondered to, you know, ask all the folks here, you know, is there anything about the journey of this particular book that you might want to share with our audience, might be helpful to others, you know, maybe ways that the book almost didn't come to be, or things that surprised you about the process of creating or putting this book out into the world? I know it's very early still on your book's journeys.
I will share a very quick story about how this book came to be, because it also is a Philadelphia answer. I was working with a grad student at the New School who was working on stories about Appalachia, and she was writing these really beautiful short stories about female-driven about Appalachia. And we loved them, her fellow workshoppers. And after her first workshop, she admitted that she was terrified to write about her home place because she didn't think it was literary enough. And I gave this like big impassioned monologue about, you have to understand that your hometown is beautiful to you and important to the world, so it will be important to everyone. And then I went, and I believed that. And I went home, and the next time I was working on whatever novel I was working on, I realized that I had felt the same way about specifically Northeast Philadelphia, that there was nothing there that could be literary. Because, like, for example, like the lack of zoning violations makes it a pretty strange place, like a miniature golf course next to an auto zone, next to a park, things like that. And I didn't think that I could connect AutoZone to the stars, as I'm like a speculative writer and I write in the surrealistic medium. And I realized, as soon as I realized I was scared to do it, I knew that I kind of had to do it. And so Beautyland was like my attempt to literally and figuratively connect a place like Auto World in Northeast Philadelphia to the beautiful, grand, galactic nature of the stars. And so, like, my advice to anybody is, wherever you're from is interesting. You just have to write into it deeply and hard enough until you find the thing that's special to you. And most of the time, that translates to the page and to the reader as well.
Wow, that was beautiful, Marie. And I'd love to follow that, only because I feel like I've been sort of thinking about the writing community, especially here in Philly, as I guess I've lived or been in other spaces where as an immigrant, someone who was first generation college, somebody who just like did not have books in my home, I just felt like totally an outlier, totally fraudulent. But particularly with, you know, the writing community here in Philly, like there are so many of us who had that kind of origin story, that it has felt me feel, I think, like, yeah, to the spirit of your comment, like these stories do deserve to be told. There should, you know, there is space for them, and it feels like empowering and just like validating that others are in that room with you, right? That Philly room particularly. And for me, you know, that community, I mean, you know, writing is a solitary act, but that encouragement, particularly as somebody who's jumping to creative nonfiction quite reluctantly, felt really, yeah, felt really confirming and important. And I think we rarely out ourselves as not, you know, not coming from educated families or not coming from wealth or not, you know, and then it's almost like you kind of whisper it on the sly at the corner of the party. But I feel less like worried or hung up about that with my Philly community. So I just appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Annie. And when folks were talking just now, especially about zoning and like Northeast Philly, all I could think of was, oh yeah, the thing that's in Northeast Philly is all the prisons, including Holmesburg, that didn't even close until like not that long ago. So that seems like a kind of grand feature is insofar as places that one can actually remember specifically, or places like that, at least from certain standpoint. I was stuck on the thing that you said, Asali, specifically about thinking about Helga's observations or the way that she saw things or the things that she saw. And I'm wondering, you know, if that's something you think about a lot when considering landscape, place, and these things, especially in I mean, you brought up the thing about young people. You have a lot of stuff with young people in that context too, with writing about and through Philly. And if that is like a lens that you see being really viable or big part of people writing from this perspective, landscape, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this because, you know, several years ago, I was like, I don't know any names of trees. And I went on a tree tour of a cemetery, and all I remembered after that was the Japanese maple. But I realized that the landscape, like a lot of times, the landscape in my work is like popular music or clothing or, you know, kind of, and certainly when I write about Philadelphia, I didn't even know how many places I'd name checked in the last novel until the copy editors came back with all their queries, and they'd be like, "This closed in such and such." And I was like, "What?" You know, didn't recollect naming all these different places where you could get a cheesesteak or whatever. You know, this at the museum. But I think like the landscape and the observations that my characters make are of kind of like human creations, you know, and these things that are just like very specific markers of like specific culture. Like there's a very funny line, and this is not my work, but in a Daniel Evans book about, you know, somebody seeing a cookie tin and they wanted to know if there were cookies in it or if it had already been turned into a sewing kit, right? And that's like such a real human detail and the kind of thing that I want in my work. But also I've been thinking about the way we were talking about either from the sort of violence of tearing down buildings or just I think what Michael was talking about with the city that used to be. And I think about that so much and how when I started writing stories that were essentially a sort of about middle school and then finally working my way to adulthood, what I didn't realize that what I would be doing is writing time capsules. I don't know. I did not think things would change the way that they have and to the degree which they have. And, you know, was sort of inspired by Edward P. Jones, who writes really deeply about Washington, D.C. And when I was reading those stories, it also felt like he was writing about something that was kind of static. D.C. is completely unrecognizable. You know, the D.C. you go to now is unrecognizable from Edward P. Jones stories. And I think it will be interesting in several years to go back and look at some of the things that I wrote earlier that were so deeply immersed in Philly and West Philly in particular, and like look at what this looks like now, you know.
Fantastic. Yeah. We have a great question from Elena Johns, a local Broad Street Review journalist, asking a great question I think lots of people probably want to know. So Elena's saying many here are balancing other careers or work alongside being authors, like teaching. As writers, it can be so hard to branch off from what is paying the bills to mount a big project as uncertain as a book. Can anyone speak to that? As a day-to-day journalist and aspiring author, I would love to hear sort of how do you make it work? How do you sit in the uncertainty when there's certain things that are calling your attention?
I am, I guess, I don't know, I feel bad with silence. I don't want to be, but then again, I don't want to talk because I feel bad when I'm talking, so it's real. But you know, I don't know, I kind of want to answer the last 4 questions all at once. Let's see if I can not do that. You know, balancing the project, like a book with other stuff. I'm a freelance journalist. I mean, I do some teaching. I mean, I don't know, I'm just a freelance writer. I do journalism, I do short story, you know, got some poems. They're not good. They're very bad. But then you kind of get a book going. And again, this one took way too long. You know, it's just, this is the big question. It's always the big question. How do you do it? How do you do it? And it's really, well, I think, you know, I'm thinking about landscapes, talking about what are the landscapes? Are they music or are they buildings? But, and I can't remember Isamu Noguchi, the sculptor, artist, he has something about how, like, we in the panorama that we see, like we are that panorama, something like that. So when we talk about this term landscape, it's kind of slippery, but we know what it is. But I love how everybody has an exactly different answer of how you make these projects work. And, you know, the answer is there's no good answer. Oh my God, it stinks so much. There's no good answer. But I mean, I'm sure there is. I mean, like lottery winning, you know, all kinds of wealth situations that I can only imagine. But in terms of like paying the rent and books, you know, I mean, as a freelance writer for these 30 something years, you know, some days you're like, what can I write? So they would pay me on Thursday. I mean, I don't know, but I want to say that one of the really fun things, one of the amazing things is, you know, always when I start to work on something, I'm like, can I work on this for a long time? Will I still be interested in this? Will it hold my attention? That's always a big question. And I'm kind of amazing. Like this one took, I'll say 10 years. My wife might say a different number of years, might be a little longer, but at the end, like the other day, I'm proofing galleys and stuff. I'm like, oh my God, I'm still into this. I cannot believe it. I cannot believe that human beings are allowed to be so excited about things. And then there was one other thing, and everything I've said, well, I'll mute off because I can't remember the last thing I was going to say. Bye.
No, that's great. That's great. Ellie, the finger keeps being pointed at you, so can we put you on the spot and then maybe Mike too as a debut? Tell us more. Yeah.
I am watching my life being like narrated in the chat. Yeah, I somehow for about 10 years, you know, Annie mentioned my Maine getaways. This is a little weird in hindsight, but for 10 summers, the last day I taught in May, I got in my car, I drove to like an island in Maine. I lived alone, like kind of basically in the woods. And then I drove back on like the day before I started teaching in August. And somehow I just did this. Like, this seems kind of strange. And I had a rule that I had to like do something with one human being like once a week. And I just like lived in that mode for a long time. I got a ton of writing done. But of course, since then, I got married. I had a kid, and that has become like less and less possible. So I do get up super early. I mean, I love to write on trains. Like, I love to write on the train going into work. There's actually something about being surrounded by people doing other stuff. I love to just edit and I don't know. I try to just like engage with it every day in some way. I mean, what I really need is like the tunnel I can go down and just like live inside for a while, like we all do. But even on mornings I'm teaching, I try to get up early and just like read for 20 minutes, just like touch material that feels connected to something that is connecting my brain to what I'm working on. And a couple of times recently, I've like borrowed a house from somebody who wasn't in it for like 4 days and just barely slept and just, you know, just dwelled in it for just a period of days. And that kind of revitalized me to go back to all my other stuff. So, but it is super, super hard in the absence of a spouse who's a lawyer. I agree. I see you in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
I've
You go.
talked a lot during the Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in a PhD program at the moment, so I get like, I have like a stipend, and then I do some freelancing on the side. But I've always I had like a desk job for like 6 months when I was 23, and other than that, I've always just sort of been committed to working part time and having a lot of time to write. And you just kind of have to be okay with being broke and being like stressed about how broke you are for a really long time. And I think that works fine. That's great in your 20s. It's like more stressful in your 30s. I think I'm getting to the point where like I don't, you know, that isn't. If you want to have things like a kid and a house and stuff, like at some point you need to like participate in the economy in a normal way. But I mean, I don't. I think it's like if you can find a way to prioritize time, like figure out a way to live so that you have big blocks of time, and I think that's way harder to do now than it was in like previous decades and previous generations, which is not a satisfying answer, but I think if you yeah, it's got to be time before money, I think, unfortunately.
Asali, Marie, Joseph, before we close.
I mean, I always agree with the 4:35 a.m. Before the kids and one's half dozen jobs force things out of you that you can never get back. But you know, that really is what it is. And lots of writers have said this kind of over and over again as a kind of staple point to be able to get things done, which I think is true, ultimately. I think Bob is raising.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh my God, I'm reading this book. I just got out of the Philadelphia Free Public Library. Has anybody read this? New Grub Street Kissing? Nobody? One writer writes just for art, and one writer writes just for the market. This is like 1880s when publishing is like a machine that's going to, don't tell me how it ends. But it's not going well for the guy who writes just for art, but I'm hoping, we'll see how it. So, all right, that's.
Yeah. I mean, in the continuous dilemma, I'm looking at time, which we are approaching the end of as well. And I don't want to keep any of our readers over time. And thank you all for coming again. Thank you all for participating and helping Blue Stoop be and continue to be a community in all these different kind of ways out in the world. I want to mention before I forget also the next Blue Stoop event that we'll have coming up is here on January 16th. I'll plug spot to it here for the Bricks reading series at Head in the Hand Books. It's January 16th at 7 o'clock. So if any of you are free and available, please come through and check it out. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah,
And thank you.
and I wanted to just give a final plug. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Everyone who's been here has contributed in some way, financially, with community, with support, all the things. If you're expecting a galley to be mailed to you, we're going to start fulfilling those like this week, right after this event. We're so close to our goal. We're at like $6,500. Our goal is $7,000. So if you have a Philly friend or a reader or writer in your life that you would like to gift them an exciting thing like a galley of one of these folks, we're so close to our goal. I'll put the link in the chat again. And yeah, if we could again have really, wonderful love in the chat, emojis, whatever you would like for our amazing authors. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate you. Thank you. Amazing. All right. Well, good night, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Good night, y'all.
Till next time.